Well, hello and welcome back to Midweek Mashup. Today I'm sitting down with Pastor Eric, and we are jumping into our Mark series.
Yeah.
We just finished chapters 1 and 2 of 16.
Yeah, let's go. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah. So what's up with this curveball? We do like kind of 4 to 6 week, maybe an 8-week series, but like we're doubling down on this one.
Totally. Part of the introduction to the series that I did in my first sermon was there's just so much nonsense, and people talk about Christianity and defending Christianity, and there's a million different versions of Christianity, and there's a popular movement of Christian nationalism, and it's just all like, oh, we got to defend Christianity and Christian values, and I'm just like so sick of hearing about that stuff because it's all so vague, and it's just like a banner that people wave to say that, I'm on this team and I'm against you. And I'm like, all right, like I hear the things that people are talking about in relation to Christianity and how it's intersecting with our culture, and it just doesn't line up with the Jesus we read about in the Gospels. And so I thought, well, let's just dig down into the Gospels and get to know Jesus. And pragmatically, Mark is the shortest. 16 weeks is probably more palatable than a 28-weeker through Matthew, so
right.
So we chose Mark. But the cool part about it is that I've done deep dives in all 3 other Gospels for teaching purposes, and just had, I want to say, a lower opinion of Mark. That sounds bad. But it's just a very matter of fact, Jesus did this, said this, and there's just not as much outright like, here's the theology behind this. It's actually a little more coded. And so doing a deeper dive, there's a ton of personality in Mark. It's not just wooden, narrative. It's there's so much richness behind what he's saying. When you dig a little deeper, you're like, I see what he's doing. He's feisty, actually, and there's some really good stuff. So I'm having a lot of fun just taking a real deep dive for this one. But that's the idea behind this long series. Just want to spend that time, like, keep our eyes fixed on Jesus. Who was he? What did he do? What did he say? What did he tell us to do? And let's let that be what defines us, not some cultural version of Christianity.
We talked a little bit about some obscure laws on Sunday, and that was really fun. If you haven't seen that, you should go back and you should watch that. Yeah. Because some of those were pretty shocking.
Crazy.
Yeah. It did remind me of this clip that I want to show from How I Met Your Mother.
Hop on, Marshall. Tonight, we ride! You won that? Not exactly. You see,
Tell me why we shouldn't call the authorities right now.
Go ahead, call them. But first, can you show me the rule that says you can't drive a motorcycle on the casino floor?
It's not in here.
And kids, that sign is still there to this day.
I forgot about that scene. That's such a funny bit.
So a bit of a longer clip than we usually show, but it kind of resonates because like all of these laws kind of get built up in the Old Testament,
right?
Because people kept screwing up, and so new laws had to be invented to say, hey, well, okay, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, and then those laws get passed down to the Pharisees,
right,
who are doing their best to keep it all together. When we have all of these laws that the ancient Israelites were supposed to follow,
right,
often contradicting each other for different circumstances and time periods, and it's like how are they supposed to manage that? It's
such an interesting thing because so many of the laws that that pop up in the Old Testament are probably from like different times and eras too. You know what I mean? Because the first 5 books of the Bible especially are written down way later than the events actually take place. Some of it's really old, but some of it is added later. And so some of it is early on. They're reacting to, hey, you're going to be different than the Egyptians. But then there's new Egypts all along the way because there's all these different foreign powers that kind of put pressure on Israel throughout that time to like change their allegiance or do things differently or change their culture in a way that just looks like everybody else. And so some of those laws are probably reacting to, you know, Moabite culture or Babylonian culture or Syrian culture or these things that happen over time. And so they seem, some of them seem arbitrary, you know, but they're probably just, hey, we need to stand out from this culture that does this thing this way. And it may seem really minor, but actually, like, for them, it was important that they kept their identity separate as God's people and didn't just get, like, absorbed into it. The problem with that is that means they're contextual theology. And that means in this time and place, here are the things that we need to do to stand out as the faithful people of God. And then a generation later, those things might be different, and yet you can hold on to those things. And so that's one of the things that the Western Church has done, like, unintentionally, is adapt over time. And some of that is just happens naturally, and some of it has happened intentionally. And then there's other things that we've held on to that you know, we didn't realize was for a time and place, but was probably not like a universal ethic. And so Jesus comes along in his own context and says, hey, what does God actually care about? Like, is it the letter of this law that was given to this group of people this many years ago? Or is it human beings? In fact, isn't that what the law is for? Isn't it to help human beings thrive, not, restrict them, so to speak? And so I love that Jesus does that, because he shows for us a model for how we think ethically. Rules and laws are fine if those rules and laws are meant to help people thrive. And if they aren't, then they probably need some updating. And you can see that too in our own culture. You'll hear people say, like, well, they broke the law. And sometimes you're like, yeah, but is the law actually moral? You know, is it a moral law? Is it line up with the ethics of Jesus that he gives to us? Are all laws is following every law make you moral? Like, okay, yeah, don't speed because it's dangerous, right? But I think of, situations in history where the law was used for evil, and what do Christians do in those scenarios? Right. And I think Jesus gives us a model to say, well, we certainly must ignore some laws if it means protecting people, if it means sticking up for the little guy. And there are times where the law would lead us away from the way of Jesus, and therefore we must resist that. Some people don't like that. They like rules. But I think Jesus gives us a model here for this. I mean, I brought it up in both of the sermons. 2 times in the first 2 chapters of Mark, Jesus breaks the law. And when I say law, I don't mean just religious law, because for the Jews, there was no delineation between moral and civil and ceremonial. It was all one law. So for their legal experts, he was breaking the law. And his whole point was to say, yeah, because if it's between healing this guy who needs healing, or if it's feeding people who are hungry, and the laws are preventing me from doing that, well then, yeah, I want to break that law. And I'm like, oh, cool. Yeah. As someone who doesn't like a lot of rules myself, I'm like, that's pretty rad. But I also think I see the tension for people where they're like, well, what do we do with that? What do we do with that? And I think it's like, well, we need to discern. We need to look. That's why we're doing this study in Mark. We need to look to Jesus. What did he do? How did he handle these things? And do our best to follow in his footsteps.
There's definitely a group of people that I've heard say, like, oh, we should still, as Christians, be following the laws of Leviticus, of the Old Testament, that those laws that Jesus was breaking. Yeah. So what do we do with that? Like, is that even applicable to us?
I think that's so tough, and I've heard people do certain justifications of that, like, oh, well, in the Old Testament you find civil laws, because it's a theocracy, so they have to run the government this way. Then you've got moral laws, which are universal, they don't change. And then you've got, like, ceremonial laws. How do you worship properly? I can't find a Jewish scholar that looks at the Old Testament law and would would make that claim. That's a modern day invention, that idea. There's wisdom and discernment, and you'll meet a lot of people who would say that they're followers of the Torah, who don't eat kosher, and for various reasons, and others who do because they feel bound to all of the laws in the Torah. And so, like, there's debate even within people from Jewish backgrounds, but I think one of the things that we have to do, again, is discernment on all things, and we use the text itself to figure that out. So for one example would be in Mark 2, Jesus talks about new and old wineskins. And it's clear that something new and greater has now come in Jesus. At least for Christians, that's what we believe. We definitely love the Old Testament and the teachings and the history and all of it, the theology. It's all good, and yet as Christians, we believe that Jesus came in as doing a new thing. He has done a new thing, and according to him and the writers of the New Testament, this new thing is a completion of the old, or an improvement upon the old, or whatever, right? Whatever word or adjective you like there. And so he's telling them, hey, the old wineskins can't handle the new thing, this new wine that's coming. That, this was good to help us stay. These guardrails of the law were good to help us stay faithful to God in that time and place. But now God is doing something new, and he's welcoming in way more people. And he'd always welcomed in more people, but like it's breaking through in a new way, right? And so right off the bat, Jesus is signaling that, like, hey, something better has come along, and more and more people are going to be invited into this. And so all of a sudden the categories are shaken up, and he doesn't settle all that for us. But he does give us, like I said, he does give us a template, about how to process these things. Here's the law. God wants humans to thrive. Sometimes it's a wrestling match. It's trying to figure that out. And then you have something like Acts chapter 10, where Peter is given this vision of all these unclean, according to the Old Testament law, animals. And he's saying, I will never eat these things. And God's telling him, get up, kill, and eat. And he's like, no, I've never let anything unclean touch my lips. I won't do it now. And God says, don't call anything unclean that I have made clean. And the metaphor is not about food here, though the interpretation goes on to say that, well, yeah, those who are Gentiles are not going to be forced to eat kosher. That's not going to be an expectation on them, because it's never been. But the expectation, the thing that actually changes, is that Peter then starts interacting with these Gentiles and sees that God is now inviting all these new people in, and he's removing some of these restrictions that maybe kept people out before, and saying everybody's welcome at the table. And then you go to a different part of Acts. The chapter and verses are evading me now, but basically they're hearing about this back in Jerusalem, and they're like, well, what are we going to do? And they don't tell them to eat kosher. They don't tell them to get circumcised. They basically say, like, hey, don't eat meat sacrificed to idols, and avoid sexual immorality. And those two things are actually more related to the Roman religious practices than they are, universal ethics, so to speak. But they're basically saying, like, yeah, don't get sucked into the worldly religions around you, but you're free to follow Jesus in your way as Gentiles. Very long roundabout way of saying this is the kind of template that we're given. God intended human beings to thrive, and so what we seek to do in our ethical discernment of what is right and what is wrong in our time and in our place, that's where we start. What does it look like for this person or this group or the whole to thrive?
Well, thank you for sitting down and sharing a little bit more about Mark 1 and 2. I'm sure we'll hear a lot more from you over the course of the next 14 weeks. If you're interested in what we have going on here at FCC, I'll go ahead and add a banner to Pastor Eric's message on Mark chapter 2. And if you are looking for more, we have another video for you right here.